Anglo-American system of justice. The system of justice and law that we enjoy, there are two kinds of, really two branches of law. Everything can be considered, you can put everything under civil law, including family law, estate planning, tort law, including personal injury, commercial litigation, corporations, people who just sit down and do procurement law. It all falls under the civil side of the law. The other side is the criminal law. And it doesn't mean that they're equally divided. You have far more attorneys doing all those areas of civil practice than you do criminal law, obviously, for obvious reasons. Today in the bar, I think the latest, I think the bar numbers are already up to like 8,000, which is amazing. So I think there's about 6,000 active practitioners in the state of Hawaii. Is that right, Evelyn? Maybe 6,000, somewhere around that. Quite a few people. And of those, there's probably about 100 prosecutors in the city and county of Honolulu. Maybe half of that collectively, all the other islands, the neighbor islands. Public defenders has a little fewer than that. On the federal side, you have maybe about 15 United States attorneys who do the federal criminal prosecution. Probably 8 or 9, or maybe a little more, but 10 in the federal public defender's office. And then you have the private guys and women, such as myself. The numbers that regularly appear in court would probably be about, my guess, about 55, 65, and that's it. So the entire number is probably in the range of under, so 300. That's a guesstimate. What do we do, and why do we do it? Well, in the criminal law, the thing that distinguishes everything that's done in the civil arena from criminal law is this. In criminal law, one of the goals is to punish people. Now, and you also have that. You have punitive damages in civil cases, right? I mean, if you have personal injury, and if a corporation, for example, knowingly is putting out a defective product or has reason to believe that, for example, that tobacco can cause cancer, then they can be subject to punitive damages. But it's still monetary. You don't take the head of Reynolds Tobacco and put him into prison. In most cases, and if he is going to prison, then it has to be prosecuted by the sovereign. And by the sovereign, I mean this. Unlike the private parties as well as the government that are parties in civil cases, in criminal cases, on the prosecution side, it's always the government. It's never an individual. Even if somebody is really aggrieved, in other words, if someone is the victim of a crime, a serious crime, the survivor of a homicide, the victim of a rape or sexual assault, one can imagine that nothing is worse than having such a thing happen to an individual, but the person is considered the complaining witness or the victim, alleged victim, as opposed to the person that brings the case. It's always, for example, if a woman is in fact sexually assaulted, it's always the state of Hawaii versus the defendant, Joe defendant, whoever that might be. If it's a bank robbery, it's never the Bank of Hawaii versus the bank robber. It's always the United States of America, because it's a federally insured corporation, FDIC, or the state of Hawaii in most cases these days. Usually the feds just slough off these bank robberies. So it's always the government, the United States, and it's kind of interesting because it gets really fancy if you go to other countries that follow our system of justice. If you go to England, it would be the Queen versus an individual. If you go to Canada, I think it's the, I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's the prosecutors are called the Crown Counsel, as if there was a king or a queen in Canada, even though there is no king and queen. The Crown Counsel, the prosecutor, kind of neat title to have, the Crown Counsel. About 2 years ago, I was in Australia on federal criminal depositions. Went all over Australia, and it's like you're in the maybe you're in England, not only because of the accents, which the Australians would say, we don't even sound anywhere near like the British, but because of the system that they follow, barristers and solicitors. It's really a wonderful experience being down there, but it's always the government, wherever you are, versus the defendant. Okay. What do we mean by punishment in the criminal arena? Obviously, what it involves is not just monetary damages, as you have in civil cases. The equivalent would be a fine. For example, if somebody, does a drug offense, even though there might not be any out-of-pocket loss that one can see, the person can be fined several $1,000s. For example, in the state of Hawaii, if you commit a Class A felony, you can be fined up to $50,000. If you commit a Class B felony, I might talk about what the different grades of felony are later, but now you are subject to a fine of $25,000, and if you're guilty of a Class C felony, it's $10,000. But more likely than a fine on the state side, we rarely have fines on the state side, is restitution. You hurt somebody, you pay the price. Interestingly enough, it's not the kind of civil restitution or the civil restoration that you would have in a civil case. For example, if you cause the wrongful death of an individual by the way you drive a car negligently, you might have to pay, and you would be subject to pay, a lot of money. If somebody drives a Coca-Cola truck and hits a car, killing the person, and the driver is negligent, it might run into the millions, either the judgment or settlement. In the criminal context, the restitution has to do with out-of-pocket expenses, has to do with the funeral expenses and other related expenses because of the death of the individual. It's not the kind of civil award that you get in a civil case. But what's really distinguishing about the criminal law is this. You lose your liberty. You go to prison. You go to prison for the rest of your life. And in some states, you can lose your life, right? I think it's 39 states have the death penalty now. Hawaii is one of the few states that does not have the death penalty. Does that mean that you can never be sentenced to death in the state of Hawaii? No. In the federal court, as well, well, it's actually in the military courts in particular, in the federal courts, you can get the death penalty. You can get the death penalty if there's a federal crime or if a military individual commits a crime that has federal military jurisdiction. I've had one death penalty case, and that was a military case. It never went to, it was never, my client was never prosecuted under the death penalty statute. That's how it started out, but then it was changed to life imprisonment, and he ended up with 25 years in prison, which is much better than the other 3 co-defendants who all got life in prison. You lose your liberty. And in the state of Hawaii, we have, in the state side, we have some of the most serious and most punitive sentences as far as time in prison is concerned. The potential for life without a parole is very great in the state of Hawaii, and there's many, many people who get life sentences as a result of being convicted of murder or attempted murder in the second degree. For those who came a little late, I just want to say that I assume that yeah, no one does, there's nobody here that does criminal law, so again, relax. I want you to listen and at least give me the courtesy of listening to what I have to say. It might be interesting, it might not, but don't worry about it because probably none of you will practice in this, well, none of you will practice in this area tomorrow, maybe the week after you can change your job. Okay, now what is it about the criminal law? Philosophically, we punish people. And what is it about the criminal law? How did it start out? The way I look at it is, of course, if your neighbor commits a trespass on your property or something like that, or steals your mangoes, that can be a criminal case. It can also be a civil case. You can, have some kind of civil remedy against the person. But in the area of criminal law, we're really dealing with something far more fundamental than just the law. We're dealing with issues of morality. When you think about it, And I thought about this, in every philosophical belief that people have had over the years, every religion has issues of morality. In the Christian Judeo religion, of course, the 10 Commandments: thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, which isn't a crime except in the military, by the way, not in the state of Hawaii anyway. But you can get convicted of a crime in the military if you commit adultery, which is pretty interesting in this day and age. But these are offenses that arise out of one's sense of what is right and wrong, the moral issue, ethics, and then become codified. In other words, are put into codes or laws that say that if you commit the offense of theft by shoplifting a candy bar from Long's drugstore, then you can suffer the consequence of going to jail. You can actually do that. I mean, if you steal one stick of gum, you can go to jail. Not many people do if it's the first offense. In fact, no one ever does. But it's an area where the society, not an individual, not Long's drugstore. Long's has nothing to do with it. But the society, the state of Hawaii says, we don't want people going around stealing candy from Long's Drugs or anywhere else. Therefore, we can put you in jail for doing this. And by the way, stealing a candy bar can get you up to 30 days in jail, if you want to know. It's a petty misdemeanor. People rarely get that. Okay, so I thought about another thing as I thought about this afternoon. How can I make this different rather than hear myself talk about the same things every time? In literature, interesting, crime and punishment. People find these things interesting. Even if you don't find what I have to say interesting, people find, I think, criminal cases interesting. I say Crime and Punishment, the great novel by Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist. But also, when you think about the novels of John Grisham, Scott Turow, true crime magazines, you turn on the TV, you have Law and Order, you have Boston Legal, you have NCIS, you have all these things that people find interesting. The Practice LA Law. Wherever you are, as long as there's been television, there's been criminal cases. Perry Mason. Who was the guy? Judge for the defense. Nobody remembers that, right? and Andy Griffith when he was Matlock. Yeah. And people find that interesting. The prosecutors look a little different over the years. There used to be these old grizzled, really. They're all white males of, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, and then later on that morphed into a different kind of being. And I think if you turn on the TV today, frequently the prosecutors are young, attractive females who dress provocatively, and what's that?
That was just in the paper.
Oh, that was in the paper. You're right. That's true. That was in the paper, and that's absolutely true. Oh, so I've heard. That you get a different kind of model for those roles, and of course in the judging. So, as I talk to you about these things, I'm very much aware that in some ways my subject matter is fairly easy because it can be very interesting. I had some handouts given to you by Evelyn, and the handouts are ones I've given in the past. They have to do with the rules of penal procedure, criminal procedure in the state of Hawaii. A couple of printouts of both the United States Constitution and the Hawaii State Constitution, the amendments in the United States Constitution, and the articles and sections in the Hawaii State Constitution that apply to criminal law. We'll bounce around with that a little bit later. But I want to start off with a case that I think is pretty interesting and illustrates what we do in the criminal law and some of the issues that we face and why they are important and why they interest us so much. And some of this, maybe someday you'll be dealing with, your attorney, the attorneys that you work with or for might have you, research this, or they might have a client that not only is involved in civil matters, but in criminal matters as well. example. I just had a call last week from an attorney from